If you haven't seen it before, this is Sinjoh Ruins' Arceus event in Pokemon Heartgold and Soulsilver. It's one of the many events in Pokemon Heartgold and Soulsilver that never got any real attention for how specific and hard it was to actually activate. But if you don't know what I'm talking about, I'll quickly fill you in. The games in question are Pokemon Heartgold and Soulsilver, which were both released on March 14th, 2010, and are great games, yada yada yada. But alongside their main story and post-game are parts of the game that aren't necessarily hidden, but extremely complicated and inconvenient to access by normal means. These don't specifically have a name, but I'll call them mythical events, like the Sinjoh Ruins for example. These areas can range from exclusive Pokemon that were only meant to be received by distribution events at, say, Toys R Us or movie events for the 13th anniversary, that again were only available for around a week or less. Some of these Pokemon were also the only gateway to trigger special events in Heartgold and Soulsilver, and if you weren't lucky enough to get whatever drop or Pokemon in time, these events were basically functionally impossible to get into. And again, Nintendo only did these events so frequently that word of mouth can only help so much, with only so many people actually being able to experience some of these great events for themselves. The Sinjoh Ruins are a great example of that, and going back before the release of Heartgold and Soulsilver, and or Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum, also existed the same problem with distribution events for some items and or Pokemon, with the window of acquisition being so short and event items becoming harder and harder to come by. However, one item in particular that relates with the Sinjoh Ruins is the Azure Flute, which was supposed to be implemented in Gen 4 but was never actually added. It acted as an item that was a huge barrier of entry to trigger this event, and the Azure Flute was functionally the same as every event-related item relating to a legendary or mythical Pokemon, as in receiving an item from the mailman and using that key item for a legendary or mythical Pokemon. And it was only meant to be received through a Nintendo event, but unlike the Secret Key, Member Card, and Oak's Letter, it was never actually released to the public again. Though it was stated in an interview with Junichi Masuda during the Nintendo World Report in 2013 that the Azure Flute was thought to be too confusing for new players to use, leading to the decision not to distribute it. Though I find that very hard to believe when quests like Regigigas existed in Sinnoh right before this, so do not trust this guy. Fuck this guy. Nah, I'm just kidding. Anyway. Though the only way to actually get the Azure Flute and make it one half of the way there to the actual event in Heartgold and Soulsilver, as in the Sinjoh Ruins, was to action replay your DS to trick the game into thinking you actually went and did the event. You'd then go to Spear Pillar at the top of Mount Coronet and be prompted to use the Azure Flute, and then be presented with a staircase labeled as the Hall of Origin. You then catch Arceus, then yada 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 yada. Or if you didn't do any of this and just got Arceus through a legitimate Nintendo event, but that's the boring way to get to the Sinjoh Ruins. Though what is most confusing is Nintendo still implementing the event for Arceus and Heartgold and Soulsilver, when they knew that Arceus as a Pokemon was almost near impossible to get, when already the availability window to get Arceus by an event was non-existent, and the only other way to get him, as in the Azure Flute, never came out. Regardless though, the Sinjoh Ruins still exist, and with it, the most confusing and jarring PowerPoint presentation from Pokemon Hell. But we'll get into that later. Though triggering the event for the Sinjoh Ruins is, again, said before, is a nightmare. But when you do get Arceus and have him as your walking Pokemon, travel then to the Ruins of Alph, you have finally completed the journey to get to the Sinjoh Ruins. You will start the quest by bumping into a scientist, and he'll tell you about how shocking it is for you to have Arceus by your side, and takes you down to the ruins to examine something related to Arceus. Then magically you fade in and out and appear into the Sinjoh Ruins, just like that. Though it's never actually described further where the Sinjoh Ruins are, besides being a combination of both the Sinnoh and Johto regions, along with your icon being shown far, far up north. You arrive first on the mystery stage, and when you exit you are greeted by a camper that takes you up to the cabin to the very right. And of all people, Cynthia from Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum is there. She explains the origins of the Sinjoh Ruins, and then comments about a similar presence to Palkia, Dialga, and Giratina. She then prompts you to come with her to the mystery stage after depositing all your current Pokemon to the PC, except Arceus. You'd then exit the cabin and return to the mystery stage, where Cynthia comments about how Arceus can create new Pokemon from nothing, and those Pokemon specifically, again, being Dialga, Palkia, and Giratina. You then choose your desired legendary Pokemon, and when that's all said and done, the PowerPoint from hell starts to play. And to say this cutscene is amazing is an understatement. It's sad fewer people know about this event, and alongside it, the Sinjoh ruins as a whole. The event is, if not, one of the most unique cutscenes in a Pokemon game, and it's astonishing that the developers actually went through with all this work for a cutscene that probably played in almost nobody's games. And it really makes you start to wonder about how the distribution in Lost Forgotten Areas in Diamond Pearl Platinum, Generation 3, and Heartgold and Soulsilver up to this point were implemented, and sometimes in this case, used for only one specific event. The old sea map is also in the exact same boat as the Azure Flute was, as in never being released outside of Japan in this case and restricting the event in the game files for decades to come. However, unlike with the old sea map, the Sinjoh ruins had a huge chunk of lore to them again that couldn't be found otherwise, like the realization that Pokemon actually have blood and or highway systems are actually used in the Pokemon universe, and etc, etc. You could say these real-world images in this event are the closest one could get to a Pokemon creepypasta in an official game, or how unsettling it is all when you put it into place. But when the cutscene finally ends, Cynthia congratulates you on your new Pokemon, then right afterwards you get teleported back to the ruins of Alph, and therefore completing the event for the very first time. If I didn't mention already, you can do this event twice if you have a different Arceus than which method you received the first one from. This is where the Azure Flute fits into place. Say if you got the first one from the Hall of Origin, you would need then an event distributed one for the event to occur a second time, and vice versa. Only this time, Cynthia returned back to the Sinnoh region, making it so that she's unavailable to talk to. Compared to the very first time around, it gets straight to the point. But when you get that second legendary Pokemon, that's that, and you can't revisit the Sinjoh ruins anymore. And that's the short but sweet story of the Sinjoh ruins, and the Hall of Origin as well. They're both two very eerie events for a Pokemon game, but I'd say are the most unique in the whole Pokemon franchise. The cutscene that plays in the Sinjoh ruins is nowhere else to be found in a Pokemon game, and the Hall of Origin never being released is thought-provoking in its own right. It's a shame that the Azure Flute never came out, but the Sinjoh ruins greatly fill in for it as being a great experience on its own for people to still come back to years after.